So my name is Michael Hunte. I am currently at 3X Capital, a smaller VC fund. But prior to that, I was at the Dfinity Foundation out of their San Francisco offices. For those of you who do not know, Dfinity, they are the makers of ICP, that some of you may be familiar with. I've seen some things. I was the director of community operations there starting in 2017. And prior to that, I was working at Facebook, now Meta, I guess, also in the community operations team. So I'm excited to kind of do our talk today. We'll chat some community, we'll chat some growth, and see if we can answer some questions.
Yeah, for sure. So actually there is something, especially in Web3, that some people ask about, and it's basically this kind of double-edged sword between the decision-making that community can take versus the decision-making that, for example, the company building the product can make. And now to find a good trade-offs that ensures decentralization and participation in decision-making, but at the same time maybe doesn't prevents like a fast development and iteration. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Yeah, and everyone can hear me all right? Perfect. So I think, that is a no-no, I'm sorry. So one of the things that I think you kind of have to do first is really think about, for my project, for my organization, and the decisions that we have to make, how much of that needs our community input. So one of the things that you might want to think about, and or an easy kind of test for this is, okay, are we running more of a traditional type of operation? Are we looking at creating something that's more of a DAO, where we're really going to need to make sure that we're engaging larger portions of our community? And you might have something that is a flavor in between. So I think one way you can really go about this, though, is trying to partition out some of the different decisions that your organization needs to be making. If you're talking about, bug fixes and making changes to token economics or things like this, you might have a different way of going about what types of thresholds you need to meet for community participation. I think that's one way that you can go about that. So it really kind of comes down to thinking about your organization, thinking about the product that you have, and maybe coming up with a list of the different types of questions or the different types of operations that your organization might be needing to have votes on or having people participate in governance on, and then thinking about, well, what thresholds could we implement to ensure that we're not sacrificing speed for things like bug fixes or updates to different parts of the protocol or the project, but maybe if there are more strategic questions or more, kind of grandiose philosophical questions that we want to give our community time to debate and discuss on forums, well, maybe we have longer time thresholds or longer vote thresholds to before we make solid decisions on these things.
That's actually quite a good take. So it's this modular approach, and so I guess you could also implement different feedback loops, no, depending on the specific way you actually implement this strategy.
I think you kind of have to do it that way because you don't want to sacrifice the community participation. But I think even some of your strongest community members will accept that if things are on fire, the people who are tasked with ensuring everything goes well, they need to be able to move quickly. So I think you can kind of put some of those guardrails in place to ensure that when things are on fire, you can move quickly, but you're also kind of giving the grace to your community to have time to discuss some of those bigger, more philosophical or directional based questions.
Yeah. No, thanks for the answer. And also there is another thing that is always related specifically to Web3 communities. That is, how do you see in general a good way to balance the need for the community to see a steady development, in the product, like saying new features or a milestone, stuff like this, with the short-term price action, because sometimes it feels that there is a lot of development, but of course, like the market doesn't always reflect that, and communities can get angry about it, but at the same time, like sometimes they can be happy even if there is not be any development. So I was wondering how to educate the community and grow it in a way that it's current.
Well, I think the first thing I would say is that steady development is a must. And you have to be willing to communicate that development. And even if we're talking, small milestones, it doesn't always have to be, we release a massive update and we're putting out these large, kind of communiques out into the world about all of the new things that we've released. Sometimes it can be as simple as, sharing some of the weekly progress in, a tweet or newsletter if you're more inclined to go that route, just to showcase that type of steady progress. And I think sometimes, the price action, it can do its own thing, right? But if you're giving confidence to the broader ecosystem and the retail community that there is steady development going on, and that this hasn't rug pulled, that we are still here, and progress is happening, I think that's always going to be good for price action. And when lightning strikes and you get those big moves, hopefully, people will look back and they can take a look at those communiques and that steady development as proof that, this team is serious, they're still here, they're still building. And when you do have those big releases, you do want to make a little bit of fanfare around that. Whether or not it's going to move the price, I think is a different conversation. But these are moments to celebrate, right? If you have a big release, you want to celebrate that with your community. So, to the extent that you can, maybe you do a little extra for that.
Yeah, no, makes sense. And what would you say are some ways that are unconventional, or maybe are even more effective to measure how your community is growing, rather than just counting the number of community members in Discord or Telegrams? Like, what are some community metrics that you think are undervalued when it comes to measuring the community strength?
Yeah, so I really like this question, and I will answer this one, I think, kind of trying to wear two hats, thinking through what I've seen as a community director, but also through the lens of, what I like to see from an investment side, because more and more VCs are taking a look at, community as, a metric for whether or not we will invest. And yes, it's interesting to see, engagement in things like Discord, engagement on Twitter. But one of the things that I tend to look for, and I know maybe there are some others that enjoy this as well, is trying to see whether or not a project or a community has gotten to a point where there are kind of like microcosms of individuals or ecosystems that can operate independently of the parent project. I'll kind of say that again. It's really important if we can see that there are groups, whether it's based around, maybe people working through, maybe your project is open sourced, maybe there are people playing around with open source code, trying to make contributions independent of the parent organization. Maybe there are groups that have organized and they're doing, events or initiatives or their own community building efforts independent of the parent organization. I think in Web3, sometimes we kind of fixate on this idea that if we are a part of a parent organization, that we have to go out and fund all of these community efforts and sponsor all of these efforts, but that's not necessarily the case. And if you do a good job of empowering your community, again, to grab some things, whether it's from open source code, or maybe you have some just general best practices that people can kind of pick up and share the word, share a little bit more about what they're doing, and make them feel as though they are a part of that, truly a part of that community. If we can see that, and there are some ways to measure that too, I think that's when I get excited.
Can you share it with us, these ways to measure?
Yeah, of course. I mean, just generally taking a look at the number of these organizations or these groups that are popping up, taking a look at how frequently they're meeting, taking a look at what they're producing. Are these independent groups making commits to, the overall project? And especially when we see this type of activity outside the lens of being funded directly by the parent company. Not that that's a bad thing. I think it's good if you have the ability, not all projects do, to have grants programs and to, capitalize some of these groups. But if you see people taking the initiative and they're doing that out of their belief in the project or their love for the project or your mission, that's a huge green flag for us on the VC side.
Basically, it's kind of not work groups necessarily, but clusters of committed individuals to take ownership of some specific, let's say, code base or workflow without the lead of the parent company or the incentive. If I go like, the more you see these groups, then the better
yes,
you're comfortable.
On the dev side, great, but sometimes it could even be on just kind of the general retail side. Sometimes you see groups of people coming together, doing weekly events, drink ups, meetups, just because they have a love for that project and they want to stay abreast. Or if we're talking DeFi or GameFi for that matter, they want to play around with these games. They want to see what is happening. They want to talk leaderboards. And sometimes these groups are independent of the parent organization. And when we see that, that's a positive.
And what are some ways that you think projects could help in making these groups as much independent as possible and not relying on the parent organization? Like, how do you think there's a way to incentivize these people to actually take ownership of things?
Yeah.
That is not only an economic incentive. Like, did you see already some examples or?
Yes, but I wouldn't discount the economic incentive. I think there is definitely a world in which, for early stage projects, the VC side of me almost doesn't want to say this, but I mean, sometimes you can be a bit more liberal with your cap table, right? And find ways to, whether it's, via tokens or depending on how your project is, if you don't have tokens, you can find some other means, but to incentivize some of these earlier groups. You don't always want to do that. I do think that there is something to be said for letting people, discover or feel as though they want to engage with your project independent of that economic incentive. And the way that you would go about thinking about that is those individuals probably see some sort of economic incentive for themselves independent of you handing them tokens. So maybe they're entrepreneurs, maybe they want to build something on it, maybe they have an idea or two that, they want to, if they could imagine being able to build if they were able to contribute to your project in some way.
Nice, thanks for the insight.
Yeah.
And talking about retail, what do you think is the balance or the line between having some community members that from one side are part of the project, hopefully in a proactive way, and sometimes are just considered just buyers of the token. So there is kind of this trade-off, no? It's where, okay, you are part of the project, but until a point in which we just care you to buy the token and we don't care if you like the. So I was wondering if you had any ideas on this.
Okay. I think one of the things that's worth mentioning with what time we have left is when you are thinking through your community and community development and growth overall, there's a lot of value in really thinking through the segments of your community. Every project is going to have a number of stakeholders, a number of people within their community. That can be, your developers, that can be your retail, that can be some of your non-technical, contributors to the project too. I would argue that even your employees and your VCs are all members of your community, and each one of those segments should come with different responsibilities and different asks and expectations. So, if you're willing to, spend some time thinking through each of these segments and how you want them to be engaging with your project, talking about your project, it becomes a little bit easier.
Okay, thanks. And if we would look in the future, let's say in 5 years from now, and how would you see like communities and the way that people interact within these communities like evolve? Or do you see already like some trends that make you comfortable of saying, hey, I think in 5 years from now this thing will be more relevant than this? Or
I think what I would love to see getting better within the next 5 years, and I think things are going in the right direction, because in Web3 there have been a lot of successes, there have been a lot of failures, there's been a lot of learning opportunities. I would love to see people get tighter about their ask and more, and have more clarity about what their asks are for some of these different stakeholder groups that I just mentioned. So if you're working with the VCs, what are your clear asks of the VCs? How are they intended to help your project grow? Where do you need their help? And you can go down the list and do that, with the developers that are in your ecosystem. Do you have clear asks of them? Do you have a good understanding of how they're meant to be contributing? You can even do that with retail. I mean, if we're to talk about something like an airdrop or any of these other types of marketing initiatives that are meant to get retail excited, there should also be a consideration and a conversation of, what is the actual ask that we have of that segment of our community? And it's not necessarily just, send some tweets or, hype us up in the forums. There are definitely other things that you can kind of think about there too.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one question that spoke in my mind, and it's how communities perceive or usually perceive like the mismatch between, let's say, the long-term development of a product and the mechanics of venture capital, let's say, unlocking tokens and stuff. It seems a very delicate balance, because from one side VCs are investing and contributing to the capital to which the project uses to development, and on the other side they have their own incentives mechanism. Yeah. So I was wondering, how did you see communities perceive the role in VCs in Web3?
Yeah, this is a tough one. Without getting into conversations of ethical VCs and Web3, that's a whole other thing. I think actually the onus for that is on the project and the founding team, and trying to get to a place where they start to see the VCs in their ecosystem and the VCs that they are dealing with more as members of their community than their bosses or someone that they're beholden to. And if you can kind of hold out strong during some of those initial conversations, and hopefully you have some great traction or a great product, and you can, push back against, maybe some of the bad actors that might be out there, you can get to a place where, your VCs aren't so misaligned in their needs with your general community.
Okay, that's great. So, is there anything that really surprised you, like during these years, when it comes to what is effective to create a nurtured community and make it grow by itself? Like, did you see some specific initiatives, or it could be loyalty programs, it could be just a very strong marketing? Is there a secret juice?
Yes, actually. So I'm not sure if it's much of a secret, but one thing that I have seen work well for many projects, especially when they are early stage, is truly trying to empower their earliest users. When you're starting something new, you might find that in the early days, if you have a form or you have a Twitter account or Discord, you're going to have some power users. You're going to have people who are showing up early. They're curious. They want to know what you're building. They want to participate. They're asking how they can help. And if you're building something new and someone's showing up asking how they can help, give them something to do. And I feel like if you can find those people, find things that you can set them off towards, whether that's having regional groups, or maybe localizing content, or if they're technical, maybe participating in some of the development of your project. There's huge list of things that you can have people do. But I think, one of those secrets, I guess, is just realizing when you have people in your ecosystem already that can help you scale yourself and your efforts, and incentivize those people if you can, so that they continue to do more and more and more and more. But it's good to recognize those people early.
That makes sense. And what's your take on airdrops when it comes to growing a community, or because it's kind of a double-edged sword, right? Sometimes it's never enough money to give from one side. You know? There is always somebody who will complain. At the same time, there is more marketing exposure. But if you do it once, you have already a lot of people. Maybe it doesn't work. So, what's your thoughts?
I've worked on quite a few airdrops, and I might be a little scarred, but personally, I feel like you can get maybe some of the benefits of airdrops without necessarily doing an airdrop. And you can do that maybe through loyalty programs, or if you are going to do an airdrop, I think it's just really important to kind of go back again to that ask of, if we're going to be giving away these tokens or, this part of, our economy, then we should maybe have some ask or things that people can engage with. So I think in, some certain segments, DeFi, GameFi, that can be a little bit clearer. For other projects, it's not so clear what you ask of retail in, response for these tokens. But I think it's worth taking a little bit of time to figure out, what are the asks beyond just general marketing mentions, things like this.
Yeah, makes sense. And you mentioned before that you see a positive trend, no, when it comes to manage the way that communities are growing, or if I'm not wrong. So I was wondering, how did you see during these last years the way that it changed growing a community? Is it exactly the same? Are there been some changes?
It's definitely not exactly the same. I feel like the space overall is getting much more sophisticated, and I think the space as a whole, we're learning from each other's mistakes. So I think, kind of going back to what I saw back in 2015, 2016, where it was a bit more of a free-for-all and people were just trying to get things out the door. I think when I see programs, initiatives, airdrops even now, I think things are looking more thought out. There's more considerations. Maybe some of that is due to just the space maturing overall and us having to have more considerations around maybe jurisdictions and legal and some of these things that maybe people weren't caring so much about back in 2014, 2015, 2016. But I think things are getting a bit tighter, and I think people are getting a bit more sophisticated in how they roll out these types of programs.
Okay, and if you had the chance to, let's say, take 3 people or 3 roles, to grow a team that was only objective is to grow a community, and it's a quite open question because, of course, it could be different roles, even technical ones or stuff like this. So I was wondering, how would you build a team to make sure that a project is actually full speed on growing its community and make user adopt their solution?
Yeah. I think a lot of projects, they do rush out and they bring on dedicated marketing people or dedicated community managers, but I don't know that it's always necessary so early on, especially if you're thinking about top 3. I think for most projects, especially within I would say the Cosmos ecosystem, or if you're building something that's more on the technical side, it's meant to be used by developers, it's meant to be used by people who are building, then I think it's DevRel. I think a lot of the functions there cross over directly into community growth and community engagement. And if you can get to a point where you're bringing in the people that can help you make a solid project first, then some of the other things can follow. But beyond having those 3 people, I think it's really important just to sit down and create a game plan. I think that's something that I run into quite often when I'm talking to young startups, when we have deals coming through, or if we're doing any type of mentoring. It doesn't even take long. Take 2 to 3 days. Sit down, think about your product, think about what you're building, what the expected lifespan of your project is. Obviously, if you're building something that's meant to be more product focused, some of the conclusions you come to might be different than if you're building a meme coin or a game or something that's, very retail focused. But sit down and think about, okay, well, who are our stakeholders? Who is in this community? And figure out, well, how are we going to engage with these people and how do we grow those segments of the community individually?
Okay. And how would you suggest teams to manage expectations when it comes to delays? So, let's say it's tough, no? Because usually, let's say
there will be delays.
Mainnet is coming, right? You have a date, and then something happens, some testing, and then people got their expectations, right? And but the alternative of not giving any date at all, is it viable? So, what's your take here?
No, I think this is where kind of that breadcrumbing tactic comes into play, where if you know that there are going to be delays, I mean, there's obviously you have to communicate the delay, but also don't back away from sharing what is happening. And you almost have to become over communicative at that point, and you have to share what is happening and what things you're doing to kind of get to that point where some of those delays are rectified. Also, you want to try and communicate as much as possible why the delays are necessary. Retail is going to complain. Retail's probably always going to complain if this is something that is holding up token launch. But if you're able to effectively communicate why the delays are necessary, whether it's for safety or just the overall functionality of the product, for the most part, people are generally pretty okay. And if you've done a good job of kind of creating a core community of people who truly believe in the project, truly believe in the team, they can help kind of combat some of that noise that might be coming from maybe retail.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, thanks a lot. This was a very insightful session.
Absolutely,
So
absolutely.
The public learned also.
Thanks for having me.